Well, hello everyone and welcome back to our class 6. Before we get into the material for today, as always, I'd like you to reflect on the practice assignment we gave you last week. That was to notice and be curious about real situations in your life where now that you know what you know from these 5 previous classes, where you would approach the lights differently. Whether you would, when you would first see the lights, and then how would you meet those lights? What would you do? So even if you didn't have a chance last week to think about that, take a moment right now to just ponder. Now that you know what you know about these 3 lights and the fact that they flash, they're dynamic, what would you do now that you didn't know how to do 5 or 6 weeks ago? So Greg, I'd like to ask you that question. What, even though you have taught this material for years, what has come to you, even in our experience here in this class, of what you would even do differently?
Well, it's funny, I was flashing on a difficult situation with a roommate from years ago, where the roommate was deciding not to pay his share of the rent, and he had his reasons why he wasn't paying his share of the rent. And I was, at the time, of course, I didn't know any of this. Actually, this is from quite a while ago. And I didn't understand that I was meeting a red light, and I kept talking it through and talking it through and talking it through, because I felt, powerless, that we were just, the rest of us were going to lose out on this rent that we planned on receiving. And he had his complaints. He had some valid complaints, but he hadn't brought any of them up, and just decided kind of single-handedly not to pay. And so at the time, I just thought, well, we'll just keep talking it through and talking it through. And I had no awareness of what was going on in terms of the lights. And I didn't have any awareness of my own light either, of the yellow light feeling, of the kind of startle effect of not getting paid. So I wasn't dealing very well with myself, actually, to prevent myself from going into the yellow and then actually going into the red. So I got, very stronger and stronger with what I was saying. And I think now, just looking back at that situation, what needed to happen was to actually step out of that situation and come at it from a different direction, in a different state, because it was valid. We wanted to have him pay his share of the rent that he'd promised to pay. We also were willing to address the issues that he brought up, but it needed to happen. We needed to get out of this red light, yellow light cycle that we were stuck in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great story. And, I think for me, as I've thought about it this week, it's this idea that I sometimes forget that I know more than I know. In other words, I get into these situations and I'm aware of the lights, mine or someone else's, and they change. And I kind of have a habitual response, which is, I don't know what to do. But
Yeah.
in reality, if I would just pause, I kind of do know what to do now. So I know we're going to really look at that today, of how do we gain our confidence in what we've learned over these 5 weeks, so that when we are in real life situations, we can do something different.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that is a good segue. So let's talk about where we've come from over this period of time, and all of what we've covered. So this is a bit of a review, and I actually want to point out that the reason that we're reviewing is actually to to trigger you to feel exactly what Chris just said there, that you actually do understand more than you're realizing. We do understand more than we realize. And we don't have to have an encyclopedic knowledge of this to tap into that. So when we look back, we're really looking back at the start where we began to cover the idea of connection and disconnection. And that disconnection is something that actually affects us much more than we think. And for that matter, connection affects us more than we think. That actually, at a kind of cellular level, we respond to being hooked in. We know it, we feel it, we can practically taste it. That moment when things shift and we're hooked in again, and vice versa, we feel it the instant that we get disconnected. And so on the one hand, we're very sensitive, and this can be a real challenge. On the flip side, we're very sensitive, and this is a huge advantage, that actually you have built into you a sense that can allow you to know what's going on. And that's actually really good news. And then furthermore, we covered that path, if you remember back to class 1, that path that we travel in mindful communication. And that path is one where we start out by just noticing. That just by noticing alone, even if what we notice is that we get really disconnected or we get really shut down, we have all sorts of issues coming up, that alone is actually quite powerful. That's where we begin. And then we begin to greater and greater degrees, see what's happening closer and closer to the real event. So often at the start, we're looking backwards, going, aha, like we did today. We look backwards. We say, okay, now I can see that situation differently. But as we become more mindful, as we train ourselves and understand this material at that cellular level, we start to be able to do it closer and closer to real time. And then finally, we begin to do it in real time much of the time. And that's really where we're headed. That's where you're headed. Even if right now you don't feel that way and you feel almost discouraged, like I can't keep up with all of this. Actually, you're on a path that may take a while for you to digest. And you're doing it right. You're going in the right direction. So then in class 2, that's when we begin to really talk about how we get shut down, how we get disconnected from ourself. And this is really where we talked about the green zone, the idea of the green zone, the idea that for yourself, when you start to get shut down, you can skillfully move yourself into a different situation and care for yourself in a better way that starts to bring you back, you could say back together. Instead of feeling fragmented, you actually, there's situations, there's activities you can do for yourself. There's ways of working with your emotions that actually bring you back into coherence. And how do we do that? How do we do that? And that's the answer to that. We're going to get to that later in the class, actually, but that's something that you steer in real time. It's like riding a bicycle. You can't just set the handlebars of the bicycle in one direction and say that's how the handlebars of the bicycle should be set. It's something that you do, right? You steer, or a car, or whatever. So in class 3, that's where we really started to look at open, closed, and in between. These three states where we can notice whether the communication is actually coming through, whether it's cut off, the door is shut, and whether there is some sort of in-between state where we're not sure if the door is opening or closing. And here's where we brought in our traffic light metaphor, our fundamental metaphor, and the idea of, this is a review, right? The red light means stop. Communication is stopped. The yellow light means be careful. And the green light means go. And the green light is not an afterthought there. The green light is, it's not like, well, we have to deal with all the problems. We also have to remember how to go when things are open, because that's actually a real opportunity. And we're going to get into all of this later in our class today. So this is just kind of an overview as we go through. In class 4, we really looked at the dynamic aspects of the lights in our conversations. Exactly what Chris was referring to, the idea that it is not, they're not fixed situations where, okay, somebody's in the red light and somebody's in the yellow light. We're in situations where this is moving, where we are affecting each other. And this comes back to the idea of the core idea of mindfulness, the idea that mindfulness, coming back to the present moment, is the only place where we can get up-to-date information. So we can't just go in with an answer. We can't go in with a script. We actually have to read what's happening in real time. And like with our bicycle, we just have to adjust and maneuver. And sometimes we put in the brakes, and sometimes you pedal really fast to get through an intersection. And actually, that's the way that life is. That's the way our conversations really are. And then in our last class, and we covered the red light, yellow light cycle, which we'll talk about more later. In our last class is where we really talked about the wound. You remember the wound. The idea that things do come up that wound us, and that we can't necessarily know ahead of time what that's going to be, because life is variable and things come up that, nobody could anticipate. Neither party could anticipate. We get into situations where we get stuck. Our patterns get stuck with somebody else's patterns. And we can't just wish that away. That's actually the way the world works. So then the question becomes for us, not how to avoid that completely. I guess I could sort of stay in my room all by myself forever and never interact with anybody. But actually, the more skillful thing is to figure out how to work with wounds in reality, the way they really are, how to care for them properly, and to keep them, as you remember, from becoming infected. That's the key thing, right? Do you remember that bee buzzing around? We're going to get back to that later. That, the wounds happen, but we could bring them into a sterile environment and care for them and make sure that they heal properly. So that's just a little overview of where we've gone in the last number of weeks. And now Chris is actually going to bring us through an exercise that walks us through our experience of that. So I'm going to turn this back over to Chris.
Okay, great. Thank you, Greg. And that was a great content overview of all the beautiful material we've covered. And as Greg said, now is an opportunity for you to really check in with yourself and ask yourself what's happened for you in these last many weeks. We start every practice assignment, every class with notice and be curious. So I give you that same encouragement today as we embark on this contemplation reflection exercise for you to just notice and be curious what comes up for you as I pose several questions for you to reflect on. So if you're comfortable, you can close your eyes and find a seated position or a comfortable position that you can maintain for, 5 or 6 minutes. So let's even start before the course began. Think back to when you first saw the notice that this course was happening. What intrigued you? And more importantly, what attracted you to say yes to this opportunity? What did you hope to gain? What were you wanting as your takeaways? So then as we got into class 1 and we started talking about connection, disconnection in general, what came up for you around where connection and disconnection were showing up in your life? Perhaps there were specific relationships on either side, connection that you wanted to appreciate or disconnection that you wanted to work on. Or maybe you thought of connection, disconnection more globally, how you relate to a wide variety of people. So what came up for you in that class? And then in class 2, we talked about the importance of self-connection and self-care, which is advice you have received numerous times in your life. We all have received the advice that we must take care of ourselves first. But if we're honest, we don't always follow that advice. So in this class, when we learned about the importance of self-connection and this notion of something called a personal green zone that you can create for yourself or find for yourself, could be a place, a person, a situation, an activity. A personal green zone is where we come home to ourselves. So what have you identified as your personal green zone or zones, hopefully? What helps you come back to yourself? And then we took a big step, and for the next 3 classes, we really looked at connection with others, which is probably the reason most of us come to a course like this. There's something we want different in how we connect with others. And in that first part of connection with others, we started thinking about how we show up and the fact that the lights are flashing for us. And this is where we did talk about the three fundamental states of open, closed, in between, and the three lights. And we spent a little bit more time on what happens to us when we are in the yellow light. What did you learn about the signals you get that you're experiencing yellow light? Something just not quite right. Maybe even prompting us to blame ourselves for whatever's not going right. This yellow light is a potential source of empowerment if we learn how to work with it. So how have you learned to work with it? And then speaking of the yellow light, in the next class, we worked on that red light, yellow light cycle and started playing with the idea of how our lights are flashing when we are with another person and how their lights are flashing. Have you noticed that in the last few weeks? You notice the flashing lights? And even if you didn't respond to them at all, let alone respond in what you would call a perfect way, are you getting better at noticing when the lights appear and when they change? And then in our class last week, staying with connection with others, we looked again at the reality that sometimes there's pain that's deeper than in this particular situation. Maybe there's a history with someone or a really tough issue that you've been working on. And what do we do in those cases? When there is some history and some pain has already planted itself. And we talked a lot about how to take care of yourself in that moment. How you might approach that differently in the future, what you would say, what you would do. And finally, we're here today. So just pause for a moment and wonder, what has changed for you? How are you noticing connection and disconnection differently? And how are you meeting those experiences differently? So take a moment to just appreciate what you've done, what you've seen, what you've heard, what you felt in the past weeks that has changed you in some way, even if subtle. Subtle is significant. Be proud of yourself. Okay, good. Thank you. You can let that go. So Greg, what did you notice as you did that mindfulness exercise? How are you different?
Well, it's interesting, Chris. I was looking back over this particular period of weeks, and even though, I've spent years working on this material and contemplating it and trying to put it in place, there's always something new, actually. There's always something new. And I was really uh, looking at the fact over the last couple of weeks, I've moved into a new apartment a little while back. And recognizing that this needs to be a green zone for me,
Mm,
that, when work is intense and life is stressful, to walk into a space that actually feels good to me is really important. It's not a insignificant thing. It's not just something that is about, I don't know, having a fancy apartment or something like that. My apartment's not fancy, but it is, I try to make it really nice. And I've actually really been working on keeping it clean and organized. You move and there's boxes everywhere and there's just chaos, right, for a while. And that went on for a while because I was working really hard at the time. But then piece by piece, I've just been trying to move things around. And, I got a lamp to light up parts of the room that were too dark. And just little things. It's so funny how little things make a difference. Like every morning I go in and I turn on the light in the entryway of my apartment, which is, it's not where I even hang out, but it's really dark otherwise, and it just feels weird to me to have this
mm,
big dark space that I walk past all the time. So I just turn on a light and it warms up the atmosphere, and that feels really good to me. And just, vacuuming basic things, just trying to really keep it clean, knowing that this is not, it's not um, something I can just let go or like come back to now and again. Actually, I need that kind of sustenance in a regular way.
mm. That's beautiful. Thank you.
So let's move on to one of our role plays Chris and I are going to do, and we're gonna work with this issue of being able to put this into place in daily life. But of course, we're going to start with our technology version first, as we always do. So Chris, take us away.
All righty. Action. Oh, Greg, you know that
Yeah.
class I was taking recently? I've lost all the video files that I thought I downloaded. I know I saved them, but I can't find them.
What happened?
I don't know. I hit save, but then when I went back, I couldn't access any of them.
Okay. Do you know if they're stored on the cloud?
Greg, to be honest, I don't even know what the cloud is.
I honestly don't even know either, but it's where I think it's where your files might be. But you have to be connected to access the cloud. Is your Wi-Fi on?
Oh, okay. Let me check. That would be no. I must have turned it
Mm.
off.
Well, yeah, you've got to reconnect it before we can even check. So go ahead and turn it on.
Okay, okay. It looks like it's starting to connect now.
Okay, good. So
Okay,
go
good.
back in there and see if the files are there now.
Ah, they are there. Oh my gosh, you're a wizard. Thank you so much.
No, I really didn't do anything. Just remember to connect first, and as long as you're connected, they should be there every time.
All right, got it. And maybe we can both learn what the cloud is.
Right. That sounds good. Okay, cut. Great. Um, okay, so it's a little on the nose, but you get the point here. I don't think we need to discuss that further because and again, we've all been there with technology, not logged in, whatever. So let's move it on and really look at the human version of this. What's this like in terms of our human reality?
All right, action. Greg, oh my goodness, I am so dumb. I took this whole mindful communication class and I liked what they said, but now I feel like I can't remember any of it.
Yeah, well, what's like one little part of it? Maybe if you remember that, it'll spark your memory.
Oh, well, one thing that comes to me is they use the example of like traffic lights that you see on streets.
Yeah, like what about him?
Well, I do remember, this is an easy one. I do remember that the red one meant stop.
Okay, all right.
Oh, so it had something to do with in a conversation, maybe the communication stops and you got to pay attention to that.
That sounds clear. All right. What about yellow and green?
Well, duh, green is easy. In traffic, green means go. So I remember if we feel like we're in the green light in a conversation, la, 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 everything's wonderful. We just keep doing what we're doing.
Okay. All right. Wait, okay. Yellow.
Oh, the yellow, that was a weird one. What was the yellow? You know, we laughed in the class because when they used the idea of traffic lights, we said a lot of us speed up when we see a yellow light. Not that I do, but
I
some
don't
people.
know. I've never done that.
And oh, that's right. So we talked about in a conversation, the yellow needs to be slow down.
Hmm. Yeah.
Something about slowing down.
Okay. Like, yeah. So like, okay. So how does it all come together, like with communication though? Like, what's the?
Oh, well, you know, actually, now that we're talking about it, that thing about the yellow light was really powerful because I kind of know when I'm in a yellow light in a conversation because it just feels like something's not right.
Hmm.
And I notice when I feel that, sometimes I get really harsh with myself.
Hmm.
Like, actually, like I did when I started this call with you, like when I said I was dumb. I,
Hmm.
you know, I say that sometimes humorously, but sometimes I kind of feel that way, like something's wrong with me.
Hmm. I mean, hearing you, it sounds like you remember quite a lot.
Yeah, actually, maybe I don't give myself enough credit.
Yeah, I mean, like I find that traffic light image kind of helpful. I mean, even just hearing about it. So I don't know, you definitely got something out of it. Tell me more about it.
Well, the cool thing about the traffic light is we all know what those lights mean when we drive. So what I
Mm.
liked about that metaphor is that you don't have to memorize something. You don't have to memorize a list of like 10 things to do if the light is red.
Yeah.
That at least when you see those lights, you know a first step that you can take.
Yeah.
And just being able to kind of trust that, like, okay, yeah, I can take a moment to think about this. That was really helpful.
Mm.
Just to be able to think that maybe I could do this in each moment. I don't know. I guess we'll
Mm.
see. Cut. So as you ponder that role play, I think an important question for all of us when we take any kind of a class, but certainly this one, is what is a realistic expectation of what you will retain coming out of this experience? Sometimes I know for me, my expectation is very high that I'm going to have everything memorized, and that's not the case. The reason I like this role play is often in conversation with another person, my recall is pretty darn good. So, in addition to a realistic expectation for yourself, think about it. What would it be like to trust? To trust your own experience when you're in situations that you at least know a first step to take. You at least know a first step to take. All right. Greg, tell us more. What should we do? What are the steps we've learned to take?
Okay, great. Actually, Chris is gonna join me for this. We're going to review our toolkit. So let me share here. We're going to do some drawing. And let's just look at our toolkit. Now, you know, you may not feel like you have a lot. I think you actually do have a lot. So our toolkit is going to begin first and foremost with our friend, the traffic light, right? So the reason why the traffic light is so central is because our traffic light is so easy, is just so easy to remember. It's just like we were talking about there in the role play. The traffic light is what you can remember when you can't remember anything, right? Isn't that true, Chris?
That's true.
Right? It's the kind of, what do you call it? Like,
it's kind of an automatic, like an automatic cue or something.
Yeah, exactly. And, I find particularly that the traffic light is crucial when I am freaked out. Mm. It's like when you're not freaked out, oh, well, you can do all sorts of fancy things. Oh my God, I studied whatever, Jungian psychology or something, and it's like, okay, fantastic. That's beautiful. But when you're super freaked out, can you remember anything really fancy like that? No, right? When somebody you think you're having a good conversation with suddenly says some cutting remark and you feel super embarrassed, can you remember all that fancy stuff right then? No, you can't.
I can barely remember my name in those situations.
Exactly, right? So then, we really want to understand that these traffic lights are always there. They're always available, even when you're pretty freaked out. You could be deep in the yellow light, and deep in the yellow light, you can still remember something about stop, go, be careful, and maybe a little bit about what those really mean. So that's actually, in some ways, there's our first tool in our toolkit, right? Is the idea of stop. And let's remember what that means. So stop means that this is when the communication, the interaction, the real flow has already stopped. When one party is in the red light, or both parties are in the red light, there's no exchange happening. Even if words are going and people are saying all sorts of things, there's no real exchange, because each person is kind of lost in their own experience, that's frozen experience. Each person, one person or the other or both, have become disconnected from themselves. So the information that's going in is not really landing. It's not really going in. And then be oops, so here, let me go back here. Yeah, no, that's good. Okay, be careful. And this is what Chris was just talking about, the idea of, do you speed up or do you slow down? And here we slow down. So when I'm in the yellow light, I slow down. When somebody else is in the yellow light that I'm with, I slow down. And we be careful, like full of care. So this is how we actually begin to recognize that this is a different state. This is not the green light. This is not the time to go into a big, you know what's wrong with you actually? You know what you did wrong in there? Let me tell you, let me give you lots of feedback about that. This is not the moment for this. Here, somebody needs basic care. Somebody needs to know that they're actually not all bad, because that's the voice that's shouting at them inside their own mind.
So Greg, would this be a place that I could think about my own personal green zone?
Exactly. Exactly, right? So being careful means using the green zone principle. And we'll get back to more about that later. And then again, we talked about the idea of go, that these moments when the lights are green, you're there and somebody else is there and the light is green, don't waste that opportunity. This is really the time to do something together. Now, what you do together is up to you. And actually, it's based on the flow in the moment of what's being exchanged. So if somebody's exchanging something really intimate and personal, that's what's happening right then. And you're receiving it because you're in a state where you can receive that. Okay, that's what's happening. If you're playful and you're goofing around, that's what's happening. And it may shift and change and develop over time. What's playful may turn into something deeper, or it may turn into something more active, like, let's go do this thing together. Fantastic. But the idea is that this is not an opportunity that is going to be there every moment. So in this moment, mindfulness says, make use of that.
So it sounds like a momentary appreciation when we sense that green light, to be grateful that we're
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? And even like, and I want to point this out actually here, I'm going to just for a moment here, I want to point this out, this idea that it's not, again, I said this before, but I want to reiterate this. It's not always pleasurable. Like you could have an intense heart to heart with somebody where they say, whatever, let's review the roommate story, right? They say, I'm not having a good time living here. I'm upset about things. And you say, oh my God, I didn't know that this was happening. What are your complaints? And they say, well, here's my complaints. And then you say, okay, I understand the first one, but I don't understand the second one. I want to understand, but I can't understand it. Can you say more? And when the lights are green, which is not always the case, obviously, but when the lights are green, you could have an intense exchange, and it could be even like, sort of a little heated, but you hold that we first view. So this is not about me, it's not about you, it's about us and what we're doing together. And that intensity then leaves you with a positive feeling, strangely, even if it was hard, even if somebody cried or something, you feel like, God, we really got somewhere together today.
Yeah, I think, Greg, some of the conversations I appreciate the most are those you're describing. Like I can think about with my husband when we've had to talk through really tough things, and then afterwards, I just feel so close to him.
Yeah, right. Yeah, couples can have that, friendships can have that, you know and it's like you said, well, it couldn't happen with a roommate. It could happen with a roommate, absolutely, of course it could happen with family. It could happen at work. There's no reason that, even if it's not so deeply personal because you're at work, even little moments like that can actually be quite powerful. I was in a meeting just the other day with somebody whose a family member had just died, and we broke from our agenda for a moment to just say, how are you doing, what's going on? And this person said, well, actually, I feel a little shaky today after the funeral. And it was an older relative, but it was like, this person really lived quite an incredible life. and had been through tremendous difficulty, and was an immigrant, and it was just all the immigrant experience. And we just talked for 5 minutes about this, and then we had to get back to our agenda. But actually, it was a really wonderful experience, and this person, it's not like they felt happy per se, but it's just, its connection is visceral and real.
So
let's,
I like the
please.
lights, and those are easy to remember, but I feel like after 5 weeks, there should be more.
Yes.
If I want to be contrarian here.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
What else? What else can we take from this experience?
Right. So let's pull up our toolbox again here, and let's keep unpacking this. Let's go see what else is in here. So then this whole idea of open, closed, and in between. And the thing here is to actually recognize that this door of communication is opening and closing dynamically. And it's opening and closing within myself as well, right? So we ourselves have to read our own state of how the door is. And again, this idea that, when the door is open, things just walk through. It's no big deal. And the air comes through, and the sunlight, remember, comes through. It's no big deal. And we don't have to make a big deal out of it. It's natural. It's normal. There's just nothing blocking us. That's the key. Now, it doesn't solve all of life's problems. Your roommate may still not be happy about, something in the house, and you have to figure out what to do with that. And maybe that's complicated. But the point is that you're in connection, so you can figure it out. Yeah, Chris.
Well, okay. And I know there's, the in between and the close. Here's the thing, as I think back over these weeks, it seems like a lot of the advice in this class is recognize XYZ.
Right.
Be aware of XYZ.
Right.
Pay attention to XYZ.
Right.
And I have to admit, today you're using the word tool. When I think of a tool, I immediately get an image of my garage,
sure,
where we have this strip of like a hammer, screwdrivers. And I know I can go out there, pick that thing up, whatever one I want, and go do something with it.
Right.
But when you're saying tools for this stuff, it doesn't feel like it's anything that I can do. It feels like it's just things that I'm aware of, and I don't get how that's a tool.
Yeah, right. Yeah, this is a great question, Chris. Like, how can awareness itself be a tool? Right? Normally we think, oh, well, I have the awareness, like I want to fix my whatever light switch, and so I need that screwdriver, right? But that's the thing, is actually awareness permeates our experience with a sense of direction and with a sense of what the solution is in real time. Now, with your fixing your light switch, you say, okay, I've got to unscrew the thing to fix the light switch. But in our conversations, it's not quite so simple, is it? I mean, in our conversations, everything is shifting. It's like, it's sort of like, I don't know, it reminds me of swimming in some way. Everything's fluid, everything's flowing. Like, I think of being in the waves and down by the shore. And nobody can just say, oh, well, stand over here and stand like this and you'll be fine. It's like, well, no, the waves are shifting and changing. There's always something new coming in. And so, in fact, actually, the awareness of how the waves come in is how you learn to navigate dynamically. And that's the key. So for us, the awareness is actually the central tool in the toolbox. And then it's the awareness, it's the tool. It's like those screwdrivers that have different attachments.
I have one of those.
Right, right. You know, so it's like, well, the tool is there, but then you can put in the different attachments to do what you need to do. That's
Well,
the critical aspect of awareness.
yeah, and I'm getting an insight even as you describe this with the fixing the light switch and the screwdriver, that the first thing I have to do is notice that there's a problem with the light switch.
Exactly.
If I'm unconscious
Exactly.
to the light switch is not working, then step two maybe is I do think about how one might fix it. Then number three might be, oh, I think I have a tool for that, and it happens to be in the garage. So is that kind of what you're saying, is that
Yeah,
rather than
absolutely.
immediately jump into doing, we use our awareness to sort of lead us into what to do?
Well, here's the problem, right? Is that sometimes we fix the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I did this the other day, actually. I had a light bulb and I turned on the lamp and it didn't work. So I immediately bought new light bulbs. And, you know, I thought, oh, well, I better do that before I forget. So I bought new light bulbs. Then later, I plugged the lamp into a different outlet and it worked with the same light bulb, right? So this is our problem, is we run around fixing the wrong things all the time from this perspective because we don't understand these basic principles. That's why we have to start with a toolkit that's based in awareness.
Got
So
it. Got
let's
it.
keep unpacking this here. And then, you know, this idea that the awareness itself, actually all these tools are built out of awareness. So, you know, the idea of our red light, yellow light cycle is so fundamental. It's so fundamental that, in fact, we can recognize in this situation that this cycle is happening, then we know what to fix. And remember, how do we fix these things? How do we fix the red light, yellow light cycle? Well, one of the critical things is maybe I need more space. Maybe I need to back out of this situation because actually I'm in the yellow light and I just can't handle this right now. I don't have the capacity right in this moment to bear the pain of this situation. I need to step out. I need to distance a little bit, even if that's to take a bathroom break or a fake bathroom break or whatever it is. I need to be quiet maybe and not continue to engage and get myself to a place where I can then bring that green zone principle into play and take care of myself. So this is a very powerful tool. And then let's contemplate the tool of the tool of the wound. Right? So here, just knowing that wounds can be dealt with properly or improperly is a huge breakthrough. And the idea that again, here I used blue over here, but let's say this is the green spray. Let's see, that's a green ice cube, right? Bringing the green zone to bear on the wound cuts the entire cycle, right? And then we don't end up moving over here, which none of us want. None of us want that artificially inflamed situation where then, if you remember the story, I was disabled for a number of days due to my neglect of what my body needed. And in our conversations, this is exactly how it is. Through our neglect of the signals that we're getting, we end up in worse situations than we needed to. So let's cut this whole cycle. And then in those conversations, and you could say, you know, boy, is it so simple as all of this? In a way, the good news is it's a little bit simple. You know, we're not handing you 100 different things here. This is just, we're sort of repeating in some ways. You could say, well, you know, you're kind of repeating the same thing. Well, yeah, we kind of are repeating the same thing, right? You remember this whole situation and the yellow jackets flying around? The question is how to protect this person, that person from the yellow jacket. How do you have that barrier of protection? And that, again, this is back to our green zone principle over and over and over. Rather than, imagine if you're trying to solve this situation, right? Somebody's in the red light. Well, how do I get them out of the red light? Oh, this is so difficult. Humans have worked on this since the dawn of time. And I'll tell you, if there's a few people can do it, great, but it's not most of us. So we need a more realistic solution. And the realistic solution is over there. And then finally, the idea that, you know, when we're with somebody who's in the yellow light, instead of trying to solve all their problems, you know, which we, if you're like a lot of us, you try to do, this idea that actually we just come back to our green zone principle, right? We do it for ourselves, we do it for others, and it's a quick and easy way to deal with these situations. You say, well, okay, that's sweet, but life is big, life is tough, there's all sorts of harsh things going on. Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you. But the key is, if we don't get ahead of this cycle, we're always dealing with the aftermath. We're always dealing with the infection. And the truth is that that's not sustainable. We're always falling behind. We need to get ahead of it. That's what mindfulness does. Mindfulness allows us to get ahead of this and actually address things directly. So you do have a toolkit. You have a toolkit that's quite useful. And I want you to know that even if you can't remember all the tools, it doesn't matter. You've got something in you that's useful. Okay, so I want to say that we're going to have a bonus class next week. So we have an extra class. In that extra class, we're really going to cover ongoing practice of this in everyday life, because that's important. It's one thing to have a toolkit sitting in the garage gathering dust, and it's another thing to use it, to remember how to use it. And we need practice to make that happen. And we're also going to talk about our online community, which you all are going to get 2 free months of membership in. And so that's important too, because that's actually a place for us to do that kind of practice. But Chris, do you want to give us a practice assignment for this week?
Of course, there's always a practice assignment. So here's what I suggest. You know, Greg and I have been talking about tools that we hope you're taking away, but it's important that you extract and embrace for yourself what these tools are to you or how you would describe them. So this exercise this week is intended to bring you closer to that for yourself. So I'm going to suggest that you do a journaling exercise. And you might even start out by drawing some sort of a continuum. You know, on one side, you've got connection, on the other side, you've got disconnection. And think about some of the primary relationships in your life right now. Where would you put them in this moment on that continuum? So that would be step number one. And again, it's just wherever they are in this moment. It could change, right? It will change. But then think about the tools that you've gotten from these weeks. And think about where on that continuum, in what relationship might you be interested in experimenting? Even if it's to tell somebody what you learned, kind of like the role play Greg and I did, where you're in a conversation telling him about this class. So where are you just kind of interested in someone you might talk to about this? But also look at that continuum and say, is there any place where right here, right now, there's an opportunity looming because of something that's happening with our connection disconnection, that I could start trying something out right now that I've learned? And then, because we oftentimes have these kinds of situations, if there's a relationship where there really is some disconnection, or you're heading towards disconnection, where would you say it's necessary that you really figure out how to use something here to try to prevent that disconnection from happening or getting worse? So that's the idea. Continuum. Think about your relationships. Where are you interested in using what you've learned? Where do you have an opportunity right here in front of you? And where do you really need to be thinking it's necessary? Back to you, Greg.
Great, thanks, Chris. Yeah, so I think that's it. You know, in terms of going forward, you've got tools. You've got actually a lot to work with. It's going to take some time. Don't worry about that. Allow yourself to digest this at the pace that you need to digest it, and it will tickle you. It will come up in your mind. I don't think there's any problems with that. It's a natural process. Okay, so as always, look for connection wherever you see it, and we'll connect with you again in the bonus class next week. Take care.
Bye-bye, everyone.